But nevertheless, once we get through Thanksgiving, it is kind of Christmas season, and I think it's all right to be thinking about that. And it's something important that we celebrate at Christmas time. And it's not just the fact that Jesus was born a little baby in a manger, though he was born a little baby in a manger. That's true. But that in and of itself, if that's all there was to it, that's not really enough to celebrate. What we're really celebrating, and what's worth talking about and giving some thought to at Christmas time, was the coming of Jesus into the world. The coming of Christ into this world, or we might say the intervening. You see, he invaded or intervened. It was God's plan to intervene in this human life, in the human course of events, and therefore to change everything, to change the course of human events by that intervention and by that coming into the world. And it's interesting to think, on the one hand, I think it's interesting to ask myself, why did he come, or why was it necessary for him to come? Because it wasn't just to start a religion, because there was already religion. There's already, we might say, God's religion. There was already the Old Testament. There was already the people of God. There was already a code of morality and code of conduct. So what he came for was more than all of those things, because all of that, if that's all he came for, there was already that, you see. He came for more than that, and it's interesting. We could ponder it and philosophize about it and consider and think about it. But we don't have to do that. We can just read in the Bible. He tells us. It's interesting to me to look at all the places where Jesus says, this is why I came. I came for this purpose. And I just wanted this morning to look at a few of those. Nothing very elaborate or very complicated. I just wanted to look at some of those verses in which Jesus told us why he came, and to give some thought to that. So the first one I'd like to consider and look at today is Mark chapter 2, beginning with verse 14. What all of these passages I'm going to turn to today, what they all have in common is Jesus uses the expression, I came for this reason. He tells us why he came. So, Mark's Gospel, chapter 2, and beginning with verse 14, it says, Now after that John was put in prison, by John there it means John the Baptist, not the writer of the Gospel, but John the Baptist. Now after that John was put in prison, Jesus came to Galilee and preached the gospel of the kingdom of God, and saying, I'm in chapter 1, I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong chapter. Sorry. Did you notice I was in the wrong chapter? Everybody noticed that. I'm in chapter 1. I see chapter 2 at the top of the page, but now I see I'm in the wrong chapter. I was thinking to myself, this isn't what I remembered. This is all good. I don't remember any of this. But okay, let's see. Let's start with verse 13. Now that I found the right spot. Mark chapter 2, verse 13. And he went forth again by the seaside, and all the multitude resorted unto him, and he taught them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of custom, and he said to him, Follow me. And he rose and followed him. And by the way, we haven't got yet to where I wanted to get to, but this is worth commenting on. This man, Levi, the son of Alphaeus, when it says he was sitting at the receipt of custom, it means he was receiving the taxes. He was collecting the taxes. And though we don't really get this from a passage like this, the tax collectors were held in very bad esteem. And I always like to say, it's not that we hold them in terribly high esteem today, but in this day, the tax collectors were really looked down on, because the Romans had come into that region, as they had in many parts of the world. The Romans were dominating many different regions, and this was one of them. And when the Romans came and, we might say, took over in a certain locality or a certain place, they used the local people to do their work for them, like tax collecting, for instance. And they would find people that would collaborate with them and collect the taxes. And what they would tell them is, you collect the taxes that we require, and then whatever else you can extort through threat of force by our arms, we will back you up. You're representing us, and you must collect taxes for us. And then your pay will be whatever you can extort out of the people beyond that. And so the tax collectors were, number one, the people looked at them as traitors, and number two, they were looked at them really badly because they were extorting money from them. And so this man, Alphaeus, was, we might say, a person who was not held in very high regard amongst people. So they were considered to be the most notorious of sinners. You know, sometimes it will talk about the sinners and the tax collectors. They put them all together. So this man, Alphaeus, Levi, son of Alphaeus, was sitting at this receipt of custom. And notice what Jesus says to him. I think it's very interesting. He says, simply follow me. Now, what's interesting to me about that is not just that he said, follow me, but what he didn't say that we might have presumed that he would say. He didn't say, listen, you rascal, you better straighten out your life. And I know what you've been doing with all that extra money. You cheater, you scoundrel. He could have said all of these things. We might expect that he would come upon somebody and try to get them to straighten everything out, and then you might think about coming and having something to do with me. But he doesn't say any of those things. He simply just says, follow me. Or if I can say in parentheses, just as you are, me, Jesus, knowing everything about you, I know all about your life, all about your tax. I know everything about all that is involved in your life. Nevertheless, come and follow me. Now, what that implies to me is Jesus. See, it's not that he's winking at all the problems in Levi's life and saying, "Oh well, it doesn't matter." It does matter, but what he's saying is, "Come and follow me, and then I, Jesus, will take those things and be able to work on your life." And that's what he does with all of us. He didn't ever say to all of us, "Come and you straighten out your life, and then you can come to church." No, he says, "Come follow me." That's what he says to us. Come to me, and then he begins to work in our lives. You see, and that's what he's doing with Levi. So, this man, Levi, son of Alphaeus, he says to him, "Follow me," verse 15. It came to pass that as Jesus sat at meat in his house, that's Levi's house, whose name is Matthew, by the way, the one that wrote Matthew's Gospel. Many publicans. The publicans mean the tax collectors. So all of his friends, we might say, and sinners, sat also together with Jesus and his disciples. And there were many, and they followed him. Now, notice again, the tax collectors, the publicans, and the sinners, just all joined all in the same crowd here. And he ran around with that kind of a crowd. And so now Jesus has come to his house, and he sat down to have a meal with him. And then his friends, all of his other tax collector friends, and then other sinners came, and they came and gathered around him. Verse 16. And when the scribes and the Pharisees saw him eat with the publicans and the sinners, they said unto his disciples, and this doesn't really come across in the King James translation, but they must have had a very religious sound to their voice, a very pious kind of sound. How is it that he eats and drinks with publicans and sinners? They were offended about this. And of course, the Pharisees and the scribes were the people who, as the name implies, were responsible for either copying, or they were the literate people who knew and read the text of the Scriptures. The Pharisees were the people who prided themselves on their own personal righteousness and holiness. They were so holy that they believed they were holier than everybody else. That's where we get that expression, holier than thou. You might have heard that. Pharisees are like that. They're so righteous and so holy that they didn't want to have anything to do with the Pharisees, the publicans and the sinners. And they're offended because Jesus, unlike them, Jesus is right there in the midst of all those sinners and publicans. They're all gathered around him. And so he says, they say to him, how is it that he eats and drinks with these publicans and sinners? They wouldn't do that. And why is he doing it? Verse 17. Jesus, when he heard it, he said unto them, They that are whole have no need of a physician, but they that are sick. I came. Now here's why we read this. He tells us why he came. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now again, in the King James translation, there's some things that don't really come across the way I'm sure it sounded at the time. And we don't really get, I think there's just a little touch, just a little tinge of perhaps a little bit of irony or sarcasm in what he says here. And if we wanted to get it, we might put where it says, I came to call the righteous, we might put that in quotation marks, because that would imply the quote, quote, righteous, because he is saying, you Pharisees regard yourselves as righteous. Now evidently they hadn't read what Paul wrote to the Romans. That's because Paul hadn't wrote it yet, but we can turn over to Romans chapter 3, and but he's quoting, you see, from the Psalms, so they should have known this. In the Psalms, the psalmist tells us, there's none righteous, no, not one. Now, you suppose Jesus didn't know that? What do you think? Jesus didn't read the Psalms, didn't know that was in there? There's none righteous, no, not one. But he is saying to them, he's agreeing with what they're pretending and posturing themselves to be, and he says, the people that are whole don't need a physician. Only those that are sick need a physician. He's the physician. And what he's basically saying is, you think you've got it all together. You think you're perfectly righteous without me. You see, I said to you in the beginning, there's a reason why he came. There's a reason why it was necessary for him to come. And the reason why it was necessary for him to come was we needed him.